Let's speak to Kevin Foster, who is the former Immigration Minister. Kevin, thank you for joining me this evening. We spoke an hour ago to Dr. S. Chelvan, who's an immigration lawyer. There didn't seem to me, and I don't want to mischaracterise the discussion here, but there didn't seem to me to be a huge fear from immigration lawyers that this is really going to change things to a huge degree because of what they would, I imagine, argue would be the safeguards not just of the European Convention on Human Rights, European Court of Human Rights, but also courts in this country. I wonder how much difference you think this legislation will actually make.
Well, good evening, Peter. I think it's safe to say takes us probably in the right direction. It's a welcome change of tone from the government. You know, no more smash the gangs and pretending that that was magically going to deal with things. But it's not a huge fundamental change. Yes, there are some changes in there, longer periods of time to wait for settlement, probably family reunion changes. It's worth pointing out there was a record year for issuing family reunion visas to those who had claimed asylum successfully in the UK, about 20,000. So you'll see some numbers and numbers around the refugee and asylum system go down. But is this an absolutely fundamental change? Well, despite the protestations of some on the left, you know, the UK will still be signed up to ECHR rights, in particular Article 3 and Article 8, the Statelessness Convention, the Refugee Convention, and other bits of law that have generally been used to frustrate the enforcement of the rules. Because you can have a great set of asylum and immigration rules, but the core real challenge comes when you actually need to enforce them and start removing people out of the country. That's when the real test of this comes.
And this is one of the points as well, Kevin, because if you have a new system that Shabana Mahmood says you've one application for asylum and one appeal and that's it, well, that doesn't sound to be particularly practical. I think it would be a good thing to implement, but is it actually something you think will happen? Because our immigration lawyer a little earlier on said he just didn't think the courts would be standing for it. I just wonder what your instinct is as someone who's been immigration minister.
I think it is something that could actually be implemented, and I'll say this why. Most lawyers have a sense of the criminal courts system, where, for example, if someone's tried for a crime, yes, they can put an appeal in, but they can't run an entirely new line of defence a week later, having been convicted of a criminal offence. You know, the courts will say, well, hang on, you said it wasn't you. You can't now come here and say, oh, it was me, but I didn't mean it. It was, you know, that's what you can't do. And then you have the appeal process. So there's certainly a lot to be said for that type of approach. That said, there will still be things like putting in certain further submissions and other areas, and challenging effects of removal. And this is where the ECHR in particular really comes in, is when people say, well, I've been here a couple of months, you know, my kid likes chicken nuggets, or, you know,
those
it would be
those
really
absurd
damaging to my
excuses.
friendships.
Yeah.
That's when you get a lot of these challenges, is when you actually come to the removal directions where people have failed, including a lot of people who their Home Office has already rejected and then struggles to get out of the country.
Yeah, and I do wonder whether the overall net effect of this will be a deterrent effect. Do you think it will?
It might have some impact, but the numbers have been spiralling really since Labour came in. They hit the peak in 2022.
They weren't great when the Conservatives were there either, Kevin.
No, they weren't, Peter, but they were falling quite considerably.
Although the Boris wave numbers, the Office of National Statistics has increased those. So, I mean, clearly there were many problems.
I think, Peter, well, there were issues there. I think I'd actually say that this number that they've refined was actually under Rishi Sunak. So perhaps we need to debate the Rishi wave and the failure to implement some changes Boris had planned to the skilled worker route in 2022. But I'll stick with the issue of illegal migration, given that's what Shabana Mahmood's announced. Sure. And in reality, that's what probably most people have at the top of their list is, you know, how do we stop this flow coming in through the channel of mostly single men whose backgrounds we know not a lot about and who are very different to, let's say, our safe and legal refugee routes, for example, Ukraine, where it's mostly women, children, families, elderly men fleeing fighting, not men who, in the Ukrainian sense, would be staying to actually be part of the Ukrainian army. So in terms of this area, you know, I think this is probably a change of direction from Labour. Will it dramatically change the numbers? Probably not. It may stop them getting a little bit worse. It might drag them down a little bit. But the real question for the government's going to be is, are you prepared to start removing people back to places like Afghanistan, Eritrea. If not, or if you can't get agreement, remember we're going to have to deal with the Taliban to send people back to Afghanistan. Then can you get a third country agreement, i.e. Rwanda? And I have a sneaky feeling that sometime in about the next 6 months, they won't call it the Rwanda plan. It'll be the Central Africa plan, or it'll be the country somewhere else plan. But something like that is also going to have to be brought back to answer the questions about where you send people if you absolutely cannot get agreement, or it's just a country you could not send even an RAF plane into.
There may well be an increase in these safe and legal routes. There are only really 3 at the moment: Afghanistan, Hong Kong and Ukraine. If there is an increase in these safe and legal routes, well, clearly there's going to be an increase in the levels of migration and the levels of people seeking asylum and immigrating to this country. So given that is a key part of this proposal, surely the numbers will go up in that regard as well. What do you make of that particular part of it, Kevin?
Yeah, it's interesting to read the points around safe and legal routes. But from my own experience, if you want to hear an SNP council leader talk like Nigel Farage, just ask them how many spaces they'll be offering in their council for refugee resettlement. It's quite remarkable. When I used to get letters from councils demanding, there should be 10, 20,000 visas for Syrian refugees at that time. That was some of the campaigns going on. Then we'd write back saying, well, thanks for your letter. Perhaps you could let us know how many spaces you're prepared to offer in your own area. And things went very quiet. Glasgow was usually about the only place that would actually follow through with what it was calling for. So they're saying these routes will be based on what is community capacity. Well, if that's based on the spaces and numbers offered by local councils, then I suspect the numbers might be quite low, not least with the absolutely stunning hypocrisy that Shabana Mahmood rightly called out from the Green Party's deputy leader, who, we're going to hang out the flags to say refugees are welcome here, just not quite here where I live, which has been quite a remarkable turnaround.
Speaking of turnarounds, what do you make of the fact that Nigel Farage is actually welcoming some of this, and Kemi Badenoch of the Conservatives is saying they can work with Labour on this? Because most of the opposition seems to have come from the left. You were indicating some of it there. It seems to have come from the left rather than necessarily the right. But actually, within that, Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage would go a lot further and withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights.
Well, I think it's sensible. If we see the government going in the right direction overall, even if they're not going as far as we would want them to go, but we change things like the rules around settlement, the rules around what support you have to have, then actually we can say to them, well, look, we do support this overall direction. You should go further. And I have a feeling, Peter, that they will end up going further in the end, because I think they will see the need to change, particularly rules around the ECHR and claims for asylum for those coming from France. But it makes no sense to go into a lobby with Jeremy Corbyn to shoot the whole thing down. That doesn't make a great deal of sense. And actually, it might even strengthen the government's hand in resisting some of the comments and nonsense that's been said and attempts to water down even this progress. If the government at the end of the day knows that on key votes to actually pass it, we'll make our points, we'll push amendments from the Reform of the Conservative Party of the policy that's there, but then at the end, we won't allow left-wing Labour MPs and other politicians to shoot the whole package down.
Kevin, thank you. That's Kevin Foster there, the former Immigration Minister. I appreciate him joining us on the programme this evening.